check. Check one, check two, check three. Check one, check two, check three. Mic check one, mic check two. Give me a thumbs up if you're good. All right. Is that everybody? Everybody still waiting? Good to go? All right. All right. Everybody's good. All right. Good deal. Everybody heard me well while I was standing up here, right? Okay. Okay.
Everybody ready? Everybody ready? They're ready. Okay. You guys ready? Hello. Is this on? Where's Kendrick? Is this? The capital punishment sentence of Freddie Eugene Owens was carried out tonight pursuant to the order of the South Carolina Supreme Court and in accordance with state law. The execution began at 6:35 p.m. and inmate Owens was pronounced dead by a physician at 6:55 p.m. Mr. Owens was sentenced to death for the killing of 41-year-old Irene Graves on November 1st, 1997. She worked at a Greenville convenience store. At this time, I'll turn over the podium to three members of the news media who witnessed the execution. After all three speak, they will take questions from the podium. They will not be available for interviews after the news conference because they have to write their own stories. First, Jeffrey Collins.
Yes, my name is Jeffrey Collins. I'm a reporter with the Associated Press. That's JEFFREYCOLLINS. I just kind of walk y'all through a little timeline. The witnesses got into the room, the witness room, about 5:57. So as y'all know, there was a little delay. The Supreme Court apparently needed to make a ruling. The curtain opened at 6:35, and the execution started about a minute later. Owens made no final statement, and in South Carolina, the inmate doesn't make the final statement. Either his lawyer or a prison official reads it, and the prison official said there would be no final statement. You could tell. Oh, okay, thank you, Christy. So the execution was announced to be started about 6:36. When the curtain opened, Owens looked at his lawyer, who was sitting fairly close to him across, of course, the glass. And they exchanged like a little back and forth. You can't hear what somebody says, but you can mouth words back and forth. She smiled at him. He appeared to smile back at her. Once the execution was announced as starting, Owens was conscious for maybe a minute, maybe just a tad bit longer than that, where his eyes were open and he was still looking at his lawyer. There was still regular breathing. About a minute and a half later, his eyes closed. There was about 4 or 5 minutes. Well, right after his eyes closed, there were some heavy breaths, looked like some very deep, almost snoring-like breaths. Then about 4 or 5 minutes after that, there was almost like facial twitches, like little tiny movements of the head, some very shallow breathing, and then it looks like I have down at, I believe, 6:42, that stopped. So there didn't appear to be any movement or motion. About 6:55 or 6:54, the doctor comes in, puts a finger up to check the pulse, puts a stethoscope on Owens' chest, and then she nods at the warden, who makes the declaration that the sentence has been carried out.
Good evening. My name is David Ferrara. I'm a reporter with the Post and Courier. That's David, David, Ferrara. Tonight, I was one of the three media witnesses here for the execution of Freddie Eugene Owens. We came in, like Jeffrey said, shortly before 6 o'clock. There was a delay. We were told that it was because the Supreme Court was reviewing the decision. At about 6:36, the curtain opened, and the drug began flowing after permission was granted for the execution to begin from one of the executioners. There were 3 people in the room with Freddie Owens, in addition to the separate witness room in which there were 11 people, myself included. He made eye contact with his attorney for pretty much the entire time that he was conscious. He said some words to her that weren't exactly clear. His attorney had said something to him, asking if it was bad, and there wasn't a response that was recognizable. The drug stopped flowing roughly about 6:54, and about within the minute after that, the doctor walked in. It seemed like a doctor with a stethoscope around her neck, checked his pulse in his right arm, checked his neck for his pulse, and then put a stethoscope on his chest to make sure that there was no pulse. And about 6:55 p.m. is when he was declared dead.
Good evening. I'm Justin Doherty with Fox Carolina News in Greenville, also one of the witnesses there inside the execution chamber today. To give you a perspective of what it looked like, there were 3 rows of chairs. We were in our own separate room as far as witnesses go. There was several panels of windows in front of us, and there was a dark curtain drawn for several minutes. We entered the chamber at 5:57, and the curtain opened at 6:35. So that entire time, the witnesses were sitting there looking at the curtain. Several horizontal bars were in front of us between the inmate and the glass. The curtains were drawn at 6:35. Freddie Owens was laying in front of us horizontally. And so we could see his head to our right, his feet to our left. He was in a green jumpsuit with a white sheet up to his chest. And as soon as the curtain was drawn, he immediately turned his eyes to the witness room and looked around the witness room and pretty much made contact with each one of us, made eye contact with each one of us. And then his eyes drew back to his attorney, and he gave her a big smile. He looked at his attorney, mouthed several words. At 6:36, that's when they were able to proceed with the execution. From 6:36 to 6:37, he maintained eye contact with his attorney, who is seated directly in front of him. And so she was able to see directly at him. She also maintained that eye contact with him. He was mouthing several words, but you could hear him say bye. You could clearly hear him say bye to his attorney. They were making eye contact. He said bye. She responded, said bye. Then at 6:38, that's when his eyes slowly closed and the heavy breathing and the shallow breathing began. It almost had that snoring sound, and his head was slowly bobbing back and forth. So from 6:38 to 6:42, that continued. The heavy, shallow breathing, the nodding of the head. And then at 6:42, there was no movement at all. From 6:42 to 6:49, there was no movement. Prison official walked over, examined Freddie Owens, nodded his head once, and walked back to his post off to the left. Then at 6:53, the physician walked in. She examined Freddie Owens, checked his neck for a pulse with her hand, took the stethoscope off of her neck, placed it on his chest, and at 6:55, she turned and looked at the DOC officials. At that point, DOC officials said, the case of South Carolina against Freddie Owens is complete at 6:55 p.m.
Yeah. Yes. The one of the key differences, this one took longer from the point of the drug starting and the execution beginning until the point in which there was no breathing. Earlier ones, if my memory, I mean, it's been 13 years, but that was more of like a 2 to 3 minute process, and this was maybe a 4 to 5 minute process. That was one of the key differences. Close to the mic, yeah. So that was one of the key differences there. As far as the other methods, the other stuff goes, there wasn't a whole lot of difference. I mean, we were in there for 35 minutes almost before the curtain opened. There wasn't a word said. There isn't, except for the prison official announcing that that they were awaiting the Supreme Court decision to tell us that why we were sitting there and it hadn't started yet. No sign of any discomfort. Freddie Owens, the whole way through, had maybe like a small smile or certainly not a grimace or anything like that during the time that he appeared to still have consciousness when this was going on. Yeah, let me explain the room to you. One thing to understand in South Carolina is the IV is put in place before the curtains opened. So the witnesses don't get to see, so everything's in place. Owens is laying on the gurney. Like I said, his feet are to my left. His head's to the right. His arms are stretched out. And there's you can see the IV line comes from a room that's off to the right. It actually comes through a wall. There's a small hole where the tube comes through and goes towards his arm, and it goes towards the arm that's farther away from us. So it would be his right arm. So you can't, it's hard to, it's a little bit more difficult to see because you can't see an IV bag or anything on that side of the room. And then there's what looks like, I'm assuming it's mirrored glass because it's mirrored on one side that leads into that room. That's also the room where the physician comes out at the end.
Any other questions for the witnesses?
Oh, yes. So and David, you may know a little more than this, but we're sitting in a second row. There's 3 rows. The third row behind us is Christy Shane and a SLED agent. Then the media witnesses are in the second row, and the first row that's right in front of the window, from left to right as I'm looking at them, there were 2 members of the victim's family. There was a law enforcement official and someone from the solicitor's office. And then the 5th seat, which is at the far right, was Emily Pavlova, was Owens' attorney.
What was the reaction of the family members?
The attorney was, when the curtain opened, she gave Freddie Owens a smile. He smiled back. As a couple other people have mentioned, there was a little bit of mouthing of words back and forth, looked like maybe bye, and maybe that she asked him if it felt bad. I didn't see any reaction from the 2 law enforcement people. And the 2 family members of Irene Graves, they looked intently, they didn't, their gaze didn't look away from him until well into the process when you could tell tell his breathing had stopped. But they didn't react in any other way. There wasn't like any animosity or any, anger or anything. They just kind of gave him a fairly intense stare, but not like a stare down kind of stare. Just looked at Owens.
There were 3 witnesses that were associated with either the families of the victims or the family of Owens. Forgot about the mic thing. Yeah, so there were 3 witnesses that were from families, not from law enforcement or prison officials. One person was from Irene Graves' family, and 2 people were from either the other victim's family, Christopher Lee, to which Owens had admitted to killing in the Greenville County Detention Center after his verdict. And figured I'd give it a second. And there were also 2 unidentified family members that we're just not sure who the names are, that were in the front row and to the left. Could have been family of Graves, could have been family of Owens, could have been family of Lee. We're not too sure. It was 2 men.
Before you start, did you say and spell your name earlier? Did you spell your name?
Justin Doherty, Justin, last name Doherty, Dougherty.
I was just running that thought through my mind. Again, it's just the somberness of that room. I mean, that was the longest I have waited before the curtain is open. I mean, typically in these things, the curtain opens less than 10 minutes after we get in. Sometimes it's only 5. It's a very short length of time. So that was a long time to sit in silence and wait for this to happen. So that was one thing that was different. And it's, like I said, again, the only words that were ever spoken in that room was from the prison official who explained very briefly what the delay was about. And yeah, that to me was the one that's different about this one than some of the other ones I've been to.
Let me just make a quick clarification. The witnesses in the room included 2 members of the Graves family, an official with the solicitor's office in Greenville, a spiritual advisor, and the inmate's attorney. So those were the witnesses other than us.
I will add, as far as the two family members for the Irene Graves family, I was watching them. They were off to the left, and throughout the waiting process, one you could see was growing exhausted, a bit tired of waiting, often closed his eyes, nodded his head. You could tell he was growing impatient, but once that curtain was opened, both of those family members stared directly at Freddie Owens. And they did not look away. They looked right at him. And they were positioned essentially right in front of his feet, and they had turned their head to look at his face. Inside the execution chamber, there were three.
There were three visible people. There was one person that the executioner was speaking to behind a curtain, orally speaking into a headphone to.
Sure.
It was unclear whether there was another person behind there or if he was just talking into a headset and stepping behind the curtain as to not have his words be read out.
So there were for sure two prison officials visible off to our left. One essentially at Freddie Owens' feet, and another one at a microphone. And then there was another individual straight ahead where Freddie Owens, his head was here, arms stretched out, his left arm pointed at us, feet to our left. There's an individual straight ahead, right at Freddie Owens' waist. And we're waiting for Christy to confirm exactly who he is. And then, so there were three visible, and then the doctor came in at 6:53. Everybody.
And just to add real quick, Freddie Owens, when the curtain opens, he tilts his head. He's very strapped down. There are straps coming over his shoulders, and his arms are strapped down. But he's able to turn his head. And, you know, if he's laying this direction, feet here, head here, he looks towards us. And he kept that gaze in our direction, looking at his lawyer the entire time. So even after he lost consciousness, his head was tilted our direction.
Yeah, to add to as well, Freddie Owens, there was a blanket that was probably about maybe up to his mid-chest. Yeah, about here, white blanket. Green jumpsuit. As Jeffrey mentioned, he was strapped in and almost kind of, it was over his arms. Yeah, almost like a seatbelt, but over both arms. And he had his left arm had the IV going into it, and the right arm was, I guess it was out as well.
Sorry, can you just go over his positioning one more time and return the IV?
It was, so Freddie is, so for us sitting here, he is aimed this way, so it was his left arm coming out with the IV going into it. So, yeah, straight out. Left arm was out. He turned his head towards us.
There were no last religious rites or anything.
He had no statement. Was that the fellow who was standing almost in his midsection? Was that a spiritual advisor?
The man at the microphone?
No. In other words, like he was right in his midsection.
Wearing fully white.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm checking on that.
Okay. There was someone standing there that Christy's checking, but there was someone standing there, but there was no like outward religious, ceremonial, anything like that was done. Oh, go ahead.
And he also made no last statement. Other questions?
I guess this is a question for you. Is there any information you can say about final meal?
There is. Give me 1 minute. Is there another question in the meantime?
Well, while we, yeah, was there any, can you hear me? I mean, some strapped down, any movement on his hands at all during it?
The way, I mean, No, wouldn't y'all say not? Because he couldn't. Right. Yeah, there didn't appear to be, because it's like his arms are, there's like a little, like, little boards, but not boards, like it's a medical table, and his arms are strapped out like that. So I'm not sure he could move his arm at all if he wanted to. So.
And it probably wasn't. I mean, it very well could have been, but it looked like it was almost like masking tape that was on his fingers, something along that lines. Maybe it was some form of medical tape, but there was no way that any finger movement, any hand movement, no.
I would say the only movement Freddie Owens made was tilting his head to us, examined the witness room, then made eye contact with his attorney, and that lasted for about 2 minutes, and then he closed his eyes with his head still facing the witness room. And there was no movement besides him turning his head.
In answer to your question about the last meal, I have a question about that, so I'm going to have to just give it to you in a few minutes. Yes. I can't hear you. I do not. You'd need to speak to his lawyers. Are we good? Thank you. Listen, the building's gonna be open for an hour after this, so until, I'm sorry.
It's 8:40.
It's 8:40, so.
7:40 to be 8:40.
So 8:40. I appreciate your patience today. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your professionalism.